Chapter 8, Final Chapter. ⎢⎪Nżao's politeness is an eerie politeness. Please sit down and drink water. He poured a glass of water for Lu Yi and looked at him blankly for a moment. Suddenly, he pulled his mouth and smiled without warning. What can I do for you? Lu Yi didn't answer, and didn't move the water cup. The two of them sat opposite each other. With some lighting and sound effects, they could form a successful haunted house without makeup. After a while, Qianzhao stopped making eye contact with Lu Yi, his eyes became scattered and indifferent, and he said to himself indiscriminately, I have a very peaceful life today, and I feel that the person monitoring me has left. But my bird was killed, and I forgot it. He muttered to himself indiscriminately, and suddenly he stood up a little manically, and hurriedly said to the person who didn't exist in the air, they took my bird, which means that my whereabouts have been leaked. They will come to me soon. What should I do? What should I do? Has this guy changed the dosage? He feel crazier than when they first met. Lu Yi finally opened his mouth. Your bird is still alive, but Zhao Xiaohua is dead. We found his body. Strictly speaking, the remains of his body. His father's secretary shredded him, and then he was thrown into an artificial lake in a park. Dead? Broken. Qianzhao was stunned for a moment, then suddenly, his eyes widened, and he spun around the room like a donkey. No, this is also a procedure, it just makes you feel that this world is real. It's not time for me to take the medicine, it's so hard, it's a little uncontrollable. Qianzhao's eyes were fixed on the ground in front of him, and the voice of the mad words in his mouth became lower and lower, as if he had forgotten the existence of others. Obviously, this is the rhythm of getting sick. Generally speaking, when encountering a sick patient, it is impossible for ordinary people to be too calm anyway, but Lu Yi is probably not an ordinary person. His buttocks seemed to be glued to the sofa, motionless as a mountain, and his wandering eyes landed in the direction of the kitchen, the place where Qianzhao took medicine, but he smiled softly in a leisurely manner. I've been thinking, in fact. Whether it is murder or dismemberment, it is not the key in this case. The key point of the whole incident is actually how to kidnap Zhao Xiaohua and avoid the surveillance equipment and his mother's eyes. Qianzhao turned a deaf ear, as if he didn't understand what he was saying at all, and circled the room in a more disturbing way, as if he could only stop when he was exhausted and when it was time to take his medicine. Later, a word of your prompted me. Lu Yi ignored him. The two of them, one sat and one stood, talking like chickens and ducks, as if they were from different galaxies, and the two-way communication channel was separated by 100,000 light-years. Lu Yi, you said conditioned reflex. As soon as he said this, Qianzhao's movement stopped, even with his breathing. Lu Yi smiled. Behaviorists believe that the entire psychological system of human beings is built on conditioned reflexes. How could I have not thought of that? Was Zhao Xiaohua deceived or kidnapped? Who is the intruder? How to avoid all the surveillance video? I thought about it for a long time and found that it is not appropriate to answer this question unless there is no such intruder. Qianzhao lowered his head and kept his eyes closed, but a smile gradually appeared on his face. There is only one person who knows how to avoid the camera. This person is not Chen Ping, not Zhao Lishu, or anyone else, but Zhao Xiaohua himself. Lu Yi said, Zhao Xiaohua's parents are not on good terms, and he lacked love since he was a child. By this age, he has revealed some problems, and similar to the causes of many problem children, when this boy accidentally discovers that all his good behaviors will be ignored, and only mistakes will attract the attention of parents, he will do it instinctively. Some children will habitually steal, and some children will be very aggressive. For Zhao Xiaohua, his method is to climb on the balcony of the neighbor's house, destroy the neighbor's property and kill the neighbor's animal, so parents have to focus on him. I heard that your birds were all killed by that child, and the security guard said that you have complained many times and asked them to assist in the investigation, so how can they assist? It's like using surveillance video. Every time the bird dies, you will ask the community property to call up the surveillance to find evidence that ᎢℋᎪNN climbed onto your balcony, and bring this evidence to the neighbor's house to file a complaint, so that the boy will be punished. Until one day, the bird died, and the boy did not appear on the surveillance video. You would understand that he had learned how to avoid the camera in one attempt after another, and you successfully trained him. What you have to do after that is to constantly strengthen and encourage. Lu Yi tapped the glass lightly. Mr. Qin, I noticed that your bird cage is hung low. It is not a way for an adult man comfortable height. It is probably to match the height of the child, right? I also noticed that there is a small tea table on the balcony where you raise birds. At first sight, I thought it was strange. Usually the balcony of people with birds does not clean, because birds flutter water and mill it out of their cages, but your little tea table is horribly clean, and I can't help but wonder, what was there? Is it sugar? Or some kind of snack that parents usually restrict children from eating? Qin Zhao lowered his head and suddenly laughed ha, his laughter caught in his throat, like a terrifying night owl. Pavlov's dog. In the eyes of extreme behaviorists, all people are Pavlov's dogs, and when they occasionally get their way, such complacency can exacerbate their personality disorders. In a sense, this is also the formation process of a conditioned reflex. Lu Yi looked at him blankly and continued, since you disguised yourself as a schizophrenic with persecuted paranoia, how can you not install a camera at home in order to deceive the doctor? I looked for the camera when I first came here, but I couldn't find it because you stopped me. In fact, it was actually installed on your balcony, right? Yesterday afternoon, you and Dr. Wang sat in the yard until the monitoring equipment you put on the balcony informed you that ᎢℋᎪNN had climbed into the balcony. You know that he will stay on the balcony for a long time, so you pretended to be blinded and apologized to Dr. Wang. When you go to the bathroom, it is impossible for people not to go to the toilet. In Dr. Wang's mind, this is the short time of entering the house does not affect your alibi that you have not left the house all afternoon. If you walk into your own house, it is impossible for the surveillance of the community to capture the owner's house, so you silently kill that child in your own house. He didn't have time to call for help. Maybe it was a sudden attack from behind, maybe you added something to the snack he was eating. Anyway, you are not Chen Ping who is powerless. With your size, kill a 7-year-old. The little boy is so easy, and then you put him in the garbage bag you prepared in advance. Qin Zhao sat down and rubbed his hands excitedly. In this way, I can dispose the garbage at night, I can drag the garbage bin with the corpse away in front of everyone, and take the opportunity to load it into someone else's car. What about Chen Ping? Speaking of Chen Ping, she is another child of yours. She is already an adult physically, but she still lacks self-control psychologically, her self-esteem is fragile, her mental state is unstable, and she tends to rely on an escape. At a glance, you know that she will try to bury the body. As for the shredded body, Qin Zhao picked up a napkin, and tore it into pieces in front of Lu Yi's. I take out the garbage every night, and it was when she peeped at Mr. Zhao, and I deliberately let her bump into me. Drag the garbage bin down the street behind, take out the contents, the scene of smashing it bit by bit, deepening her each time with words, someone is chasing me, only by smashing everything, the other party can't find my traces. You can't leave any traces behind, otherwise, all previous efforts will be lost. You must smash, sterilize and disinfect. Then, tell me carefully how Chen Ping handled the corpse, and after the smashing? Did she turn on the pressure cooker and cook the meat on a whim? Lu Yi looked at him coldly. At this moment, the two of them heard footsteps approaching at the same time. There is no one in the world, you know. Qinzhao suddenly leaned forward, almost touching Lu Yi. Only the brain in the box is left. You and I are not human. Our feelings are all given stimuli. Our thoughts are all programmed. Conditioned reflex is the only bug. The only thing you can consciously manipulate the thoughts and behavior of others. It gives you higher powers. And higher powers can let you see the world outside the box. This is our only way out. The only way out. Lu Yi looked indifferent. I'm experimenting. Qinzhao returned to his seat with straight eyes, full of unscrupulous madness. There's no experiment, you're not crazy. Lu Yi looked at him firmly. I checked your records, and it didn't take long after you moved in from the neighbors that you suddenly started seeing a psychiatrist, because the neighbor's child was there. You peed at the door. You started pretending to be sick from then on. It took 2 years, like a spider, to pave the way for this plan. During this period, you carefully observed the life of your neighbors and strived to ensure that no one know your crimes. Even if you kill someone with a failed trick, you can still disguise yourself as a mentally disabled person and be admitted to the hospital for a reduced sentence. Qinzhao looked at him with pity, and then raised his head again. He don't know when. Li Yonghao had already surrounded his house with the police. Qin Zhao's eyes swept over them lightly, and shook his head with a chuckle. A foolish, incommunicable human being. He refused to admit it. Lu Yi slowly put his hand into his pocket and took out a voice recorder. Li Yonghao took Qinzhao away with handcuffs. Qinzhao looked down at him with pity and ridicule. Lu Yi rubbed the barrel of the recorder with his fingers and suddenly felt that he had lost. He could not prove that Qinzhao was not a lunatic. In the story, the logic is self-consistent. Qinzhao was pushed hard and staggered by Li Yonghao, but he just shook his head, sighed, and said to Lu Yi proudly, "You're worse than I thought. I'm so disappointed in you." Lu Yi's hands were clenched tightly, but his eyes were fixed on a certain point in the room, and he still refused to give up. Just when Qinzhao was humming a strange little tune and was pushed to the door by the police, Lu Yi suddenly stopped him. "Qinzhao." Qinzhao paused. "Who is the founder of behaviorism?" "Qinzhao, Watson and Skinner." "Who did Pavlov's dog experiment?" He just said this. Qinzhao seemed to realize something, and his face suddenly darkened. The first smile finally appeared on Lu Yi's face, which seemed to be paralyzed. "Have you seen Watson or Skinner? How do you prove that Pavlov exists? How do you prove that the idea of behaviorism is not programmed into your mind? Inside? No, you don't have to prove it because you always knew they weren't made up, they were real." Qin Zhao's calm mask was suddenly torn apart. He seemed to have changed into another personality in an instant and struggled violently. Li Yonghao violently stirred his hands, held him tightly, and said gloomily, "Shake me again, I'll blow your head off." Lu Yi walked over. "Li Yonghao, don't come here, stay away." Lu Yi obeyed, and stood 2 steps away from him, smiled and said, "What you said, the real brain in a box will not agree with anything, nor will it try to control anything, because nothing can prove the truth or falsehood. Do you really understand, madman?" Qin Zhao's eyes were bloodshot, and his facial expression was very ferocious. Without moral and legal concepts and lack of sympathy, it's easy to be frustrated. Lu Yi paused. "Look, you're just an anti-social murderer, don't put gold on your face." Qinzhao was restrained by Li Yonghao's iron pincer-like hands and staggered away, and suddenly let out a low roar. Lu Yi leaned on the door frame, and looked at him with a tilted head, as if mocking, because of a bubble of urine. He glanced at the budgerigar cage brought out by the police from a distance. The food and water bowls were empty, and the poor little thing was curled up. Lu Yi approached Qinzhao and said, "I don't think you're worth a pea at such an old age." Li Yonghao roared loudly, "I said stay away, be careful he bites you." The siren sounded high, and Qin Zhao's hideous face behind the car window gradually disappeared. A sharp cry burst out from the garden next door. Lu Yi's eyebrows twitched slightly, as if moved, but after a while, the sadness in the cry was like a flash of lightning, passing by, and then disappearing in an instant, and sharp abuse and accusations began. The beginning seems to herald an endless war. End of story.